Hello and welcome to BQ Prime. The government has formed a new standing committee on statistics to advise on official data generated. Now, this committee is also being chaired by ex-Chief Statistician of India Pronab Sen and will replace another committee headed by him that was formed in 2019 to advise on economic data. Dr. Sen, thank you so much for taking time out for us today.
It's a pleasure, Pallavi.
To begin with, just considering how wide and how loud the criticism around several government data sets have been of late, I do want to ask you where you intend to start off. And I completely understand that there's a committee that's been set up. It has multiple members. You will meet and eventually put out a report. But I do want to ask you, where do you intend to start? What do you think are the biggest challenges that the statistical system today faces? And what are you looking at first and foremost?
Well, I think the biggest challenge, Pallavi, is that the demand for data is increasing at a rate which outpaces the capacity of the system to generate it, and that's a problem. Earlier the principal users of data were in government, but now the use of data outside government is growing very rapidly with dimensions that the government never considered at that time.
All right. So, the census, for instance, is going to take a while, especially considering its current status. Once work on the census does begin again and leading up to the point where it's published, we're a very long way away from that. The same stands for multiple other data sets as well. So, in the interim, what do you suggest?
Well, there aren't very many choices, Pallavi. When we are talking about data which is either at the household level or at the firm level, there is no alternative to having the census and the economic census both available to us. There is no option because when we collect this data, it's usually done on the basis of a sample survey. And the sample has to be drawn in a manner which is representative of the entire country. And the only basis on which we can draw such a sample is either the population census or the economic census. And at the moment, we don't have recent editions of either.
All right. So, considering the criticality of the census, and initially we understand that there was a delay because of the pandemic, but ever since we've heard very little, at least from the government, on progress about the census. So, I mean, should there, and I also want to understand if that's something you're going to be looking at, in the sense, should not there be a law or something a little more effective to ensure that such long delays, such long gaps between the census and even other kinds of surveys that are important for decision making can be avoided?
Well, as I said, there is a Census Act. The problem, of course, is that the Census Act is administered by the Home Ministry. It is not done by the Ministry of Statistics, right? And it is entirely up to the Home Ministry to decide when to conduct the census. It has been a tradition to do it on the first year of a new decade. So it should have been done in 2001. It didn't happen, but it should be done as quickly as possible. But, as I said, that in the absence of a census, all the surveys that we do, which are particularly the household surveys, are going to be less accurate because we are working with a population data which is now 12 years old. And the population has changed quite dramatically, both in its numbers and in the way it is distributed across the country.
So is that something you're going to be looking at? I mean, why the census is under the Home Ministry and if it's better suited?
We can't be looking at it, Pallavi. We will simply have to take it as given and then try to figure out what would be the level of inaccuracy of our survey results.
All right. But
We
one of
cannot
the
correct.
criticisms, sorry, please continue.
I said we cannot correct for the absence of the census.
Yeah, of
We
course.
can
But
only
also
give
the
an
fact,
estimate for how much the error could be.
right, but also the fact that one of the criticisms, and I do not know how misplaced it is or it isn't, has been the fact that the census is carried out by the Home Ministry. Some statisticians, commentators on such issues have said that maybe the census also should be brought under the Statistics Ministry or something more appropriate instead of the Home Ministry actually being in charge. So I do want to know, is that also something that the committee would want to look at and give recommendations on?
No, certainly not. There is a good reason why the census is under the Home Ministry.
Okay.
The census is such a massive operation. And I don't know if you realize the last census, the 2011 census, involved 2.5 million people going out into the field. The Ministry of Statistics does not have that kind of a reach. The Home Ministry, on the other hand, does have that reach, which is why the census is housed there. They have the authority to be able to commandeer government servants at various levels at the center and states to be able to conduct the census operation. MOSPI cannot do it.
All right, got that. Also, on individual area of statistics, so employment, for instance, is one. Are you satisfied? Of course, we have seen some progress on that, considering we did not have even this data at this frequency earlier. But do you still think that there's scope for like a quarterly government data release, which is published with higher frequency?
Yes, I think there's scope for improvement there. I mean, there have been delays and the reasons for which I do not understand. But the data is collected on a regular basis, but there seems to be some problem with the release of the data on a timely basis.
All right, okay. And also moving to CPI again, so the basis for the database, the CPI's database also is extremely outdated. We were waiting for the household expenditure survey. I believe in a recent interview you did say that it's been conducted, and for checking robustness of data, you're waiting for another round to happen before the database for the CPI can be reworked accordingly.
Yeah. So, well, let us first see what the data that we've already collected, which is for the year 22-23, what it looks like. It may well be the case that the data is good enough to compute the CPI from that. But if we have any doubts, we will hold off until the second survey is completed, which will be 23-24.
All right. So even assuming it's the first option that actually plays out, we're still a little while away from a new database for the CPI. Is that correct?
Yes, it will take a while because, the data collection ended on June 30th. All right. Now they're going to compile the data, and by the time we start getting the initial results, it will probably be November or thereabouts. November, December, somewhere around that time. Once that is done, the basket of goods and services that would go into CPI would be determined. Once that basket is determined, then we would have to do a very detailed market survey to be able to determine the exact definition of each good and service whose price would be measured. So, for instance, that if the item, let us say, the product is toothpaste, you have to go down to a specific detail saying this brand toothpaste of so and so packet size, right? So it will be like something like Colgate 200 grams, something of that kind. So you have to go down to that degree of precision. And that can only be done with a detailed market survey. Now, the market survey itself will take another 4 or 5 months. So the earliest you could probably expect the CPI would be late next year.
Got it. All right. Okay. And about the IIP, again, research from multiple economists seems to suggest that there is a widening gap. And in fact, I do remember asking you this earlier. You did say that, the way the manufacturing GVA is computed is different from IIP and hence the disconnect. But is that something as well that needs to be looked at? Keeping aside the reason, do you feel that there should be greater correlation, between the two?
Well, you see, the thing is, IIP and the GVA measure two very different things, right? The IIP measures the volume of production. Okay? It's a pure volume measure, such as how many cars. What it doesn't measure is what is happening to the quality, nor does it measure what is happening to productivity. The GVA picks up both those influences. So as far as the IIP is concerned, as I said, it's a volume measure. And a volume measure is important. We need it because employment is usually linked with volumes of production. But in terms of incomes generated, in terms of the GDP, the other factors such as productivity and the quality of products also become very important. So the two are meant for different purposes, and to get exact correlation between the two is not even expected.
In that case, do you think there is need for other surveys or maybe adding other components to IIP? So, just for instance, top of my head, considering the kind of volatility we've seen in commodity prices, clearly IIP was only giving some part of the picture. So, is there need to kind of substantiate that with other data? If not...
Well, of course, as I said, the IIP measures only volumes. Okay, number one. Number two, the IIP measures only manufacturing. So it's an index of industrial production. It's not capturing services. It is not capturing agriculture. Those are captured by other data sets. Okay? So the IIP is limited essentially to manufacturing. So clearly, manufacturing is in fact a relatively small component of our GDP. It accounts only a little over 20%. There are so many other dimensions that have to be captured, and they are captured, but by other data sets.
Got it. Also, do you think there is need for other data sets apart from strengthening existing ones? So, for instance, services like you just touched upon, we, at least from the government, we don't have any indicator to measure the strength of the services sector, especially considering its increasing significance in the Indian economy. Likewise, in case of the informal sector, and these issues have been touched upon earlier. So, is that something that you'll want to be looking at as well?
No, we've already looked at it. So there is already a proposal to have an annual survey of services, right? And that will plug precisely the gap you're talking about.
All
That's
right.
already in the works.
All right. Okay. Any other new databases that we're going to be looking at? Like, at the start of this conversation, you mentioned that there's clearly an increasing amount of interest in the Indian economy that's likely to sustain, and the kind of data generated so far is increasingly unable to keep pace.
Well, yes. What is happening is that the frequency, if you think about government, the biggest user of data in government used to be the Planning Commission. Now, the Planning Commission was making a plan which would be implemented 2.5, 3 years later. So it was in no great hurry to get data. But when you're thinking of a corporate, they are thinking about the next quarter. So they need data with far higher frequency. And to be able to generate the data with that kind of a frequency is both difficult and expensive. So we have to experiment with other kinds of data. But so far, the experiments that have been done have not proven to be very fruitful, because most of that data set is in the administrative data that's generated by various ministries in the government. And since that data is used essentially for monitoring purposes, there is some question about its accuracy.
Okay, got it. So, again, another constant criticism in recent years especially has been regarding, questions surrounding independence, non-interference from the government. So, as the head of a committee, how does the committee ensure that these are not questions consistently raised on India's data systems?
Well, this committee cannot do so. This committee is really a committee whose function is to assist the Ministry of Statistics to produce data of the right quality and of the right type. The function of making sure that the data that is generated by the system is not influenced by politics is that of the National Statistical Commission. This committee is not supposed to take over the functions of the NSC.
All right, got it. So thank you so much for taking time out for this. Always informative to speak to you.
Pleasure, Pallavi. Thank you.
Thank you.